Welcome, everybody, to this new podcast, T Talks the Truth. I'm your host, T Mall. Excited about this new endeavor moving forward. Definitely want to speak on subject matters and topics of old, whether it's religion, history, mythology, and also current climates of today. I think we've gotten to the point now where we can speak on things that are normally been spoken about behind closed doors or would be considered to be conspiracy theory. I think we moved the needle enough in the information age of where now we can speak on things openly. And I'm excited about moving forward and speaking with people about these subject matters. My first episode, the title of that will be Before Capitalism, Life in the Agrarian World. And we're going to speak on the origins of capitalism, which is agrarianism and mercantilism, of course, leading up to capitalism. But want to welcome you guys to Capitalism, where we explore the origins, transformations, and the consequences of the world's most dominant economic system. I'm your host again, T Mall, and in the first episode, we're going to take a step back, way back, to a world that existed long before stock markets, factories, or even the idea of capital. This is a story about the soil, about the land, labor, and the life in the agrarian world. So I want you guys to sit back and enjoy the ride, subscribe, send some likes, comments, want all of the above, and then also wanted to extend out these episodes even further, just to touch on in-depth information when it comes to capitalism. So again, I want you guys to sit back and enjoy the ride, and I thank you. Segment 1, Life of the Land. Before capitalism, before banks, stock markets, and global trade, there was land. The land wasn't just a backdrop for life, it was life. For most of human history across empires and continents, people live in a world where the soil shaped everything, from work and wealth to family, faith, and identity. Let's take a moment to picture that world. Imagine waking up in a thatched roof home before sunrise. Your hands are calloused from years of turning earth. You step outside and smell the morning dew. The fields stretched out before you, wheat, barley, and maybe rye. And before that, a forest that still holds ancient secrets. This is not a world of speed or surplus. This is a world of seasons. Your life follows the rhythm of planting and harvest. Spring brings hope. Summer brings labor. Autumn brings harvest. And winter brings fear. Will the stories last? Will the livestock survive? In the world, over 90% of the people work the land. The village is your universe. The farthest you might ever travel is the next market town or maybe a pilgrimage site, if you're lucky. Let's break down a bit more. Section 1, the agricultural routine. Most of the year is spent in backbreaking labor. You plow the fields with wooden or iron plow, often pulled by ox or later horses. You sow by hand. You weed. You pray for rain, but not too much. In Europe, the three-field system starts to appear. One field for winter crops, one for spring crops, one left to follow. In Asia, wet rice cultivation demands intricate irrigation and constant labor. In the Americas, maize, beans, and squash form the sacred trio, planted together to nourish both soil and body. There's no mechanization, no artificial fertilizers, no weather forecasts. Everything is done by hand, and everything depends on the balance of nature. And late frost, an early storm could mean starvation. Section 2, the household and community. Your family is your labor force. Children begin working as soon as they can walk, feeding chickens, collecting water, helping in the fields. Elders, if they survive into old age, help manage the household and pass down knowledge. The home is not just a place to sleep, it's a workshop, a kitchen, a storage unit, and sometimes even a stable. People sleep together, work together, suffer together. In many parts of the world, extended families live in multi-generational households. Social bonds are tight. You depend on your neighbors, whether to share tools, trade goods, or to survive the long winter. 3. Religion and the land. Work on the land isn't just physical, it's spiritual. In Christian Europe, saints are patrons of the harvest. The church calendar marks not only holy days, but agricultural time, like irrigation days to bless the fields or the mosque to give thanks for the grain. In West Africa, rainmakers and spirit mediums guide planting seasons. In the Indian culture, the earth goddess Pachamama must be honored before breaking ground. To farm is to enter into a covenant with divine forces. If the crop fails, it's not just bad luck, it might be a sign of sin, of imbalance, of cosmic displeasure. 4. Poverty, precarity. Let's be clear, agrarian life is not romantic. It is filled with hardship. Most peasants live on the edge of malnutrition. Famines occur regularly. One bad harvest can kill thousands. Infant mortality is high. Disease is constant. A cold winter can take out the weak. Taxes and rents are often crushing. You may owe a portion of your harvest to the Lord, the church, and the crown, leaving little for your own family. There is no social safety net. If your ox dies or your roof collapses, your only hope is the mercy of kin, neighbors, or the local noble. 5. A world of slowness and memory. And yet in all the struggle, there's something else, continuity. Your life is not your own project. You inherit it. You live out your role. You pass it on. Change comes slowly, sometimes over centuries. Innovations are rare and viewed with suspicion. Most people cannot read or write, but carry oral memory. When the frost came early, when the barley failed, when the soldiers passed through. This is a world of ritual and repetition, of survival and stability. It is a world that feels eternal, unchanging. But beneath the soil, cracks are forming. I just want to take a moment and pause and add for a quick second. This is what historians call an agrarian society, and it was the dominant way of life for most of human history. In these societies, land was wealth, and economic power was tied directly to who owned it and who worked it. In Europe, agrarian life was organized under the feudal system. A lord owned the land, and peasants, often called serfs, worked it in exchange for protection and a place to live. But this wasn't just a European phenomenon. In many parts of Asia, Africa, and the Americas, similar land-based systems existed, where small farmers sustained their families and their local communities. Unpause. Segment 2. The nature of agrarian economies. If you could step into the rhythm of life in the agrarian world, you find a society structured around a simple truth. Food is life and land is power. For thousands of years across medieval Europe, dynastic China, Mongol India, the kingdoms of Africa, and the Andean highlands, the vast majority of human beings lived and worked in agrarian economies. These were systems defined by agriculture, by the seasons, and by a deep connection to the land. But what exactly makes an economy agrarian? Let's unpack it. Structure. Number 1. Local sustenance-based economies. First, agrarian economies were local and sustenance-oriented. Most people didn't farm to sell, they farmed to survive. Households grew their own food, raised their own animals, spun their own wool, and built their own tools. The economic unit was often the household or the village, not the individual. Markets existed, but they played a secondary role. A surplus of grain might be taken to a local market or bartered with neighbors, but money was scarce, and the idea of profit or reinvestment wasn't central. There was no expectation of growth, no pressure to innovate. Stability was the idea, not expansion. 2. Social order, hierarchy, and customs. Economics in the agrarian world wasn't just about survival, it was deeply tied to the social order. In medieval Europe, for example, society was structured in rigid hierarchies. Nobles owned the land, clergy managed spiritual life, peasants worked the soil. You didn't just choose your profession, you were born into your role. A peasant's son became a peasant. A blacksmith daughter might marry a blacksmith. This wasn't just economic, it was cultural and spiritual. Many believed that God had ordained the social order, and questioning it could be seen as heretical. Economic exchange was governed by custom, obligation, and tradition. In feudal village, a peasant owed a portion of their harvest to the Lord, some labor to the manor, and certain duties to the church. This wasn't a market transaction, it was a duty, a part of the fabric of daily life. 3. Limitations, stagnation, and vulnerability. Now, all the stability came at a price. Agrarian economies were remarkably resistant to change. Innovation could be seen as dangerous. A new plow, a new crop, or even a new method of irrigation might disrupt the balance, and was often discouraged unless it came from the top. These societies also lacked what economics call today capital accumulation. There was a few opportunities to invest, to expand the business, or to take entrepreneurial risk. If a farmer grew more than needed one year, they might store it for winter, or give it to the church, not use it to buy more land or hire labor. And then there was vulnerability. Because agrarian life was so dependent on climate and crops, a single drought, flood, or pest infestation could lead to famine. Without a robust trade network or reserve system, communities lived season to season, and crisis was never far away. I want to pause again, give a little moment and a little clarity to agrarian economies. Now, here's the key thing: agrarian economies were local, stable, and slow to change. People produced what they needed: food, clothing, basic tools. There was very little surplus. Trade did exist, of course. Markets, merchants, and money were unknown, but most of the economy wasn't market based. Instead, it was built around substance, survival, not accumulation. There was no concept of economic growth like we think of today. The goal wasn't to expand your wealth year to year, but to maintain the balance between people and the land. In fact, too much trade or wealth could be seen as dangerous or immoral in some societies. Religion and tradition often shaped how people thought about money and status. Work was tied to social roles, not personal ambition. You were a peasant because your parents were peasants. The idea that a farm worker might someday become a rich merchant or landowner, almost unthinkable. Unpause. 4. Moral economy, values, and worldview. We also need to think about the moral dimension of agrarian economies. These weren't just systems of production, they were systems of meaning. Many agrarian societies viewed land as sacred. In medieval Europe, land was seen as divine trust, passed down through families, not to be bought or sold lightly. In other cultures, like among the many indigenous American communities, land wasn't even seen as property. It was communal, to be shared and respected. And work itself, it wasn't just a means to earn, it was a spiritual obligation, a way to sustain your family, your community, and fulfill your role in the divine order. The moral economy, as some historians call it, stands in stark contrast to the later logic of capitalism, where land becomes a commodity. Labor is bought and sold, and economic decisions are made for profit, not tradition. 5. A world on the verge of change. Still, by the 13th and 14th centuries, change was in the air. In towns and cities, merchants were growing in influence. In the core side, small surpluses began to appear. And in distant ports, new goods from spices to silks hinted at a world beyond the village. The agrarian world, while still dominant, was no longer absolute. The stage was being set for disruption, from pandemics to enclosures, from markets to machines. And all of this laid the groundwork for what's next to come. Segment 3. Cracks in the system, plague and the unraveling of order. By the 14th century, the agrarian system in Western Europe had been in place for centuries. Feudalism was entrenched, life was hard, but predictable, and then almost overnight everything changed. In 1347, a merchant ship docked in Sicily. On board were rats, fleas, and something far more devastating: Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that caused the bubonic plague, known to history as the Black Death. Over the next several years, the plague swept across Europe with terrifying speed. By 1351, it had killed between 25 and 50 million people, up to one-third of the entire European population. In some cities, half of the inhabitants died in just a matter of months. Villages were abandoned, entire regions fell silent. The death toll alone was catastrophic, but the consequences went deeper. The Black Death shattered the foundation of medieval society, economic, religious, and psychological. Let's look at a few impacts. 1. Labor shortages, economic shock. With so many people dead, labor became scarce for the first time in memory. Peasants and artisans who had once been bound to land or guilds found themselves in position of unexpected leverage. They could demand higher wages or even leave to find better conditions elsewhere. But many landlords and rulers refused to adapt. In England, the government passed laws like the Statute of Labourers in 1351, trying to freeze wages at pre-plague levels that only bred resentment. In some areas, the collapse of labor structures was so severe the land went untilled for years. Food shortages followed, not because there wasn't land, but because there wasn't enough people to farm it. 2. Social upheaval and drift towards barbarism. With old order in crisis, some communities descended into lawlessness. Chronicles at the time wrote about Roman bands of thieves, the breakdown of feudal obligations, and the abandonment of religious norms. Mass graves, flagellant cults, and pogroms against Jewish communities marked a time of fear and desperation. The plague had not just killed people, it had undermined the moral and social order. In the words of one Florentine observer, the father abandoned a child, the wife husband, one brother another. In places it seemed as if civilization itself had frayed. Historians sometimes describe the period as a kind of barbarization of Western Europe, not in the sense of tribes with spears, but in the unraveling of institutions and cultural norms that had held society together. Old institutions like the church lost credibility. How could such suffering be allowed? Why had prayers for so many gone unanswered? 3. Crisis of faith and authority. The church, which had been the central authority in everyday life, struggled to respond. Priests died in large numbers. Some abandoned their flocks. Others offered indulgences for money. Many ordinary people began to question the authority of the church, laying early groundwork for reform movements like the Reformation 2 centuries later. Meanwhile, monarchs and nobles scrambled to maintain control, but their power often rang hollow amid the chaos. 4. Seeds of something new. And yet, out of the wreckage came the conditions for something radically different. With so many feudal lords dead, the land changed hands. With labor in short supply, free wage work began to rise. With faith in traditional institutions shaken, new ideas about the individual, about society, and eventually about the economy began to emerge. In other words, the Black Death didn't just end lives, it ended an era. It fractured the old agrarian world and cracked open the possibility for a new one. It would take generations to rebuild, but Europe would never return to the world it had known before 1347. What followed was a long and uneven transformation, one that would lead eventually to the rise of new classes, new technologies, and new economic systems. In our next episode, we'll explore the first major transformation, the agricultural revolution, and how changes in farming laid the groundwork for capitalism. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to T Talks the Truth, first episode of the podcast, Capitalism, Agrarianism, Mercantilism. I want you guys to stay tuned for the next episode. I might do it in between, kind of expand upon agrarianism leading into mercantilism. But definitely that second episode will be about mercantilism, and we will expand and talk more about how the beginnings of capitalism come from agrarianism and mercantilism. And then, of course, we're going to go into the main point and topic of these episodes, which will be capitalism. But definitely appreciate everybody that tuned in, subscribe, likes, comments, all of the above. Thank you for tapping in. And I just want to close out and say thank you and appreciate it.